Hello, hello. This is Lyndall Duscan and welcome to Music as a Metaphor. Today is May 21st, 2024. And we're deep into the year that everybody says is when the shit's gonna hit the fan. And so far, you could translate some things that way for sure, but also we're still here too. Still doing the show. I'm actually pre-recording today because I have an event coming up tonight and won't be able to go live. And I'm committed to being here every week regardless, one way or another. So today what we're going to do is finish the discussion we had, Advice for Parents 101. That's Advice for Parents 101. So last week I talked a bit about advice for parents regarding music lessons, and in particular, coming from a particular stance as a music teacher and not a parent, right? I mean, not a parent, not as in it's not a parent, like it's not visual, but as in I am not a parent. This is coming up after Mother's Day, and I've always felt that I offer a unique perspective to the table given my over 15 years of working with children professionally, and the flip side, not being a mom, right? So we're going to talk a bit more about what that advice is coming from my unique perspective, as well as just practicality, practical advice for lessons. And that's called Advice for Parents 101B today. So we'll go ahead and get into it today. This is Lyndall Duscant. You're listening to Music as a Metaphor, and I'm going to just make the statement, how can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing when there's so much joy to be felt, although hidden in many ways? That's a topic of the music that I released a couple of weeks ago, is a new song called Boomerang, Like a Boomerang. And it has a line in there about hidden love. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of things. You have to be really committed to doing the work to see the gem behind all the dust. And that's the way it's been feeling lately. How can I keep from singing when I can really get in tune with that magic? And that's a lot of what music is about, is that it's about alignment. It's about bringing us to our truest potential. That's what music has been for me, because I came to it late in life. I just was never an attention seeker. I was actually the opposite, hiding. I was very, very shy. And I could play certain roles and I could get out there, like I was a cheerleader. I could do things like that. But when it really came to sharing my heart and what was important to me, music being one of those things, singing, the songs I heard in my head since I was a little girl, I really wouldn't share them with anybody. And in many ways, I wouldn't even admit to myself how important they were to me. And so when I came to music in my 20s, it was not from a place of wanting some great career as a musician, although there was times when my ego would take over and motivate me from that standpoint. And God used that too. But really, it was about healing myself and coming into alignment with who I was. Because I woke up in my 20s and realized I had no idea who I was. I had spent so much of my life in reaction to the world around me and in many codependent behaviors, because I'm an empath and feel very sensitively and care deeply for the people around me, and had gotten so lost in all of that, so lost in my own fear, my own depression, that I really didn't know when God started speaking to me and I really began to awaken to the joy that was available. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know which direction to go. And that's what I want to talk about today, that in many cases, the education system has failed students. I was an A student. I did great in school all the way through college, graduated cum laude 3.5 for Texas A&M, and still had no clue. So this is one of the quotes by Anthony C. Sutton that I like. It's, "The Dewey educational system does not accept the role of developing a child's talents, contrarily only to prepare the child to function as a unit and an organic whole. In blunt terms, a cog in the wheel of an organic society." So that doesn't sound too bad when you first, hear that. But the problem with it comes from the fact that society is not really a healthy, functioning society. There's many ways that fitting into this system is not necessarily good for people. Or, I think all of that is being exposed in what some people would call the apocalypse or a great revealing. If you have eyes to see now, you can see it very clearly. But for many of us, we could see these things a long time ago, and we didn't necessarily want to be part of that system, but we didn't also know where else to go. And so for me, that's where music was. It was my refuge. It was a place for me to spend hours and days and years that felt healthy, that felt like it was helping me to align slowly back to who I was, to heal traumas, to face the programming and the self-sabotaging that was clearly in me. And in many ways to unwind, right? Unwind from that. And it provided a sort of frequency protection from the world, because I've talked on previous episodes how many things in this world operate, if not everything, from a level of frequency. So when you're depressed and sad, you're going to be, more open and vulnerable to being attacked from lower vibrational things, right? To be sucked into relationships that are lower vibrational, to get pulled into abuse, to be repeating patterns, to get stuck in these lower vortexes. And they're very hard to get out of when you're in them. Music is one of those things that can help you, because as you raise your vibration, you start to become impervious to that. And you start to then attract things that help you to stay at a higher vibration, that protect you from those. You're not a match anymore for those things, right? So that's a lot about what music was for me. And it took a very long time. It wasn't an overnight thing. But the more that I did music, the more I wanted to be involved in music. Now, I will back up and say that even before that, I was involved in textbook publishing. All in my 20s, I was involved in textbook publishing. And I also was involved with higher education, thinking I would go back for a master's in art history. And because of those two experiences, I really thought a lot about education just right from the start. I think I have always loved learning. And it was very clear that I could be one of those people who's a student for life. Like, I really didn't have, very much common sense, to be honest. Didn't have a lot of business sense. I wasn't even really interested in making money. That's how out of the current society and system I was. I just wasn't motivated by materialistic type of things at all. But knowledge did motivate me, and I loved learning. So it was very disillusioning when I saw behind the curtain of how textbooks were made. And I saw that in many cases, I had set this up as some sort of authority when it didn't warrant that. It was being decided by political means, by very haphazard means. Back when I was doing it, it was almost more of the right that was controlling it, but it was like the editors were always anticipating what the right was going to say. And they were always trying to make choices so that the right wouldn't come in and say, hey, why are you putting this in there? Why are you doing that? We're going to sue you. Yeah. Right? I think now it might have swung the other way. And I think it might be being dictated more by the left in this country. But either way, the point is politics are affecting what's being put. And I think this is obvious to everybody now, but I sort of saw this for myself back in the late 90s, early aughts. And it was like a realization that I had set this up as an authority as a young girl. And I compared everything to this and realized that it wasn't worth that. It wasn't the right thing to do. Later, I would also come to realize that many of the references in my head were giving me a false sense of reality. Textbooks were only one of them, another being TV and movies, which I just put so much time and attention into, gave it so much credibility that this was the way of the world, when that's not necessarily the case at all. And the other thing I want to say about textbooks that personally did to me is that I struggled a lot with acne when I was in my teens, and I would look in these textbooks and be like, nobody has acne in these textbooks, so something's really wrong with me. And that's just an example of how off children can be and why they need the guidance of parents to help them to see that they're not necessarily coming to correct conclusions about the world. So when I got into textbooks and I was part of the photo research team and we were selecting people without acne only, And then nowadays it gets into photoshopping and all that stuff. All that was a wake-up call, and it might seem trite at this point, but in my 20s when all that happened, it made me realize that I did want to be a part of education, but I didn't want to be a part of that. And so that's where, as I, became more and more enveloped in music and loved it more and more as I was practicing nights, weekends by myself after my photo research job, I recognized I wanted to share it. For me, it was always a sense of all of us should be doing this. I just had that. And maybe it's a naive view, but that's that feeling I have inside of myself, that each of us is meant to have an instrument just as part of who we are. If we were fully functioning with our entire brains the way that Einstein, I can't remember what the percentages says, like we use like 8% of our brains. Like if we all use 100% of our brain, playing music would be just the same as walking. We would all have an instrument. We'd all play it. It'd all be part of our experience. And how fun would that be, right? Like you just go over to your friend's house and, say, hey, let's, play a few songs, or let's do this. And it's just part of our lives in a very normal way. I always had visions of that, and I always wanted to be part of that. So that's where I came to music education from. And I learned through that there were many alternative teaching models that are thinking in this direction. Reggio Emilia is one of those. And it's sort of along the lines of this. This is a quote that I saw just the other day online. It's, imagine if schools actually help kids identify their strengths by exploring their talents from a young age and growing their skills over the 12 years, instead of letting them follow the same routine and leaving them confused in life after graduation. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, I'm not the only one who goes through this system thinking that you're checking all the boxes and doing everything right. And then, especially when you're making straight A's, and then you get into real life and you don't have a clue what's going on, right? That's how I was. And I hope not everybody feels as confused or has as difficult a time as I have had, trying to find my career and feel a sense of purpose. But I think that's something that we're all are entitled to. There's many things that we think we're entitled to that I wouldn't agree. Like having the latest trendy shoe, or, doing a lot of the things that Americans in general, I'll speak only about Americans, think that they're entitled to. Like even running water, I guess we think we're so entitled to. But something I do think we're entitled to is a sense of purpose in our life, feeling that we are contributing something meaningful to our community, and that we are a valuable member of our community. And this is exactly what people don't feel, right? And it's confusing because nobody can help them with it. The school systems aren't helping. Many parents are not able to help their children with this, and it's not by any fault of the parent. In many cases, they are just struggling to make sure the material needs of the child are met, and that child is not starving to death. And when you hear about other countries and having children that literally the parents end up having to sell the children into sex slavery to make sure the family doesn't starve, then you recognize, listen, parents are doing a lot by making sure these children never have to worry about those things. But there's a whole nother side to this that needs to be explored and understood and expanded. And when I posted this David Avocado quote, imagine if schools actually help kids identify their strengths, I had a friend respond to me in private just saying, that's what sounds like parenting. And he was that kind of parent. He is that kind of parent. He very much is focused, and always has been, on knowing how to help the child explore, but with help and guidance and structure. And this is that balance that I was talking about last week. And I definitely want to back up for a minute and say that this is not a lecture to tell parents how they should be doing things and judging, because I don't know. If I was a parent, I really don't know how difficult it would be to maintain a balance like this 24/7, especially when I'm, primarily caring for that child's health and needs, right? Basic human needs. I don't know that. And I want to be honest with that up front. But what I do think is that I can offer a unique perspective because I'm a little bit in between. As a woman, I'm a little bit, I'm unique in a lot of ways, to be honest with you. But this is one of the ways in which I'm unique, is that I very much was a feminist in my 20s and 30s. I very much felt that I didn't want to just rely on a man. I didn't know I had a lot of misconceptions about marriage, I'll be honest with you, that I've come to since then and don't agree with. But one thing that I did have was a sense that it wasn't fair. Some women go into these relationships and they're almost using men to provide for the family. Not all women, and I don't even know what percentage do that, but I did see it, where it's very much like they go in and they kind of control the man and they sort of get him to provide everything. And I didn't want that, right? I wanted very much to feel like a self-sufficient woman and a partner in a partnership, and not that I was so dependent on the man. So I wanted to have my own career. I wanted to make my own money. I wanted to know what it was like, to follow my ambitions and follow my own visions and do things, to from my own identity in the world. Like I said, took me so long to figure out who I was, and I wanted to live in that space for a while. And it wasn't lost on me that, like, my grandmother 100 years ago, they didn't necessarily have the freedom to do that. There was much more limited choices to what they could do as a career. So I had the field wide open for what it was I could do, where I felt like I could contribute my talents. And I was living in a time period where that was very much accepted and open to me. But what I gravitated to was children, to wanting for the welfare of children, to helping them to be raised differently than how I was, so that they wouldn't get out of school and be confused. I was passionate about that. I love that. I was an entrepreneurial spirit in that realm. And for me, it was a combination of my womanhood, but also, my masculine energy. I mean, like, my wanting to contribute and help and take action on things. And maybe where that differentiates me or puts me in between two groups is that I never ended up having children. I never became a mother of my own for many, many reasons. And so that puts me in a unique position as somebody who doesn't know what it's like to be a mother. I am a woman who doesn't have children. And that puts me more in the camp of the corporate women who have, on these very, very successful careers and are so in tune with their masculine energy. But many of them are out of tune with that nurturing feminine side. Many of them are not around children. They don't spend much time around children at all unless they have their own. So I don't quite fit in with them because I'm very focused on children. I've spent a lot of my adult life, learning about processes with helping children to be the best version of themselves, right? Mainly through music, but also through the French language, also through art, also through emotional intelligence. I studied these things in a very business-like manner and a very professional, maybe I should say a professional manner, right? It wasn't personal, it was professional, the work that I've done with children. And I've been able to work with so many children. I've been so fortunate to be able to work with so many children and their parents. So I'm not quite in that vein of that, woman that hasn't had children and doesn't like children. There's a lot of women that are like that. They don't want children. They never wanted them. They don't want to be around them. For me, working with children has been such a joy, and I love being around children. But on the flip side, I'm also not in with the mothers. I don't know what it's like to be a mother and to prioritize that in my life. I have a lot of time to pursue my creative endeavors, which is much of the reason why I'm in the position I'm in, because I have plenty of time to explore my spirituality, to explore my creativity. And I'm very thankful for that. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So I'm somewhere in between. And because of that, that's what I'd like to offer my perspective from, not in a place of judgment towards mothers or corporate women, but more as a bridge between the two, because I think many of these women leaders in society, if they've been emulating men and going down that path, then maybe they've gotten out of tune with their feminine nurturing spirit. But I do believe it's always been the role of women in society to be very connected to the children in a way that is different from men. And I want to bridge that gap. I want to stand in between and speak from a professional place about children, but only to help the mothers, because I believe that society has has been failing the family very much. And we've been making it actually harder on families and harder on mothers and fathers to raise their children than we have been helping them. Just the way that this quote talks about, like, the schools have not been helping the parents to do this. Now, that's where music lessons, I think, has been filling a wonderful gap. Many of the music teachers that I have met very much come from a place of service. They have very much come from a place where they want to help that child be the best version, and they want to help the parents in any way they can. They want to take the burden off of it solely being the parents and the school. They want to be part of a community of mentors that help this child to discover their talents and become who they are. Now, for some students, most obviously, that's if they actually have a musical talent, right? Then the music teacher can very much help with that. But I'll be honest with you, there's a whole new crop of teachers in the last 10 years that we very much understand that music is a full brain experience that can help the child develop neurologically and physically and emotionally in a way that helps them holistically become who they are, whether or not they have a natural talent in music, whether or not music is something that they should focus on in a serious way. I've met plenty of teachers that way. It's not all of them. I'm going to back up and say that the old school method, the type of teaching method that I was in, it was a bit too rigid. It didn't account for children and all their complexities. It didn't really think about instilling a joy of music. It was very discipline based, and it was very structured. It's a lot about sight reading, and many of the music teachers were classical in nature, and they very much just taught classical music. I know from my experience, my music teacher wasn't necessarily very much fun. She was very serious, and it was mainly about sight reading. Now, I made up songs. I was always making up songs. Right? And as a music teacher, I'm very much exploring with my students that exact question. Now, the younger they are, the more apt they are to want to make up songs, right? Before the age of 5, almost all students love to make up songs. They really will. And most of them have zero inhibitions about it. Like, they will just sing, they will dance, they will make up songs, they don't care. But some of them are doing it all the time on their own around the house, and some of them are only doing that in these certain musical settings, right? So that's one of the things I'm kind of trying to decipher, when I get to know students, these are the kind of things that I can't just necessarily outright ask everybody up front. You have to take some time. You have to be asking the parents. You have to be getting to know some of these factors, right? But when you do, you start to discover this, because over the years, I recognize that some students are the type of singer that I am, where they are walking around the house singing all the time. And when that is the case, they tend to have some of the more aesthetic voices, because much about the human voice is just using it, right? There's many things that you don't need to go through formal training as a vocalist to learn how to do. If you are just walking around singing all the time, you are in general going to gain mastery over your voice in a way that somebody who doesn't really like to sing or doesn't want to sing, in many ways, that will just be a leg up. And so it's one of the things I noticed. The students that come in that really love singing, they really have aesthetic voices after the age of 5, right? Because and before the age of 5 too, that's just a factor you want to notice about your child, or as a music teacher, you want to sort of investigate. Is this child singing all the time on their own? Because many of us do. And when that's the case, these are sort of our natural singers. These are the people who probably do have some kind of aptitude that needs to be developed. Okay. Now, after the age of 5 to 9, there's many students that still like to write songs, right? They still like to make up songs. I do one exercise in particular with all of my students where I do duets with them. This is a topic that I'm going to at some point explain my method, because I've just had a parent recently who is very involved with his child's lessons and is doing something that I recommend for everybody. Any parent who's even remotely willing to do this, I highly recommend that they take music lessons at the same time as their children. I've seen this over and over again make such a difference in the lives of the students, to instill a sense of motivation, to instill a sense of joy of music and purpose. And it doesn't have to even be that the parents play duets, but ultimately, to me, it's even better if we can get to a place where they're playing together, because the joy of playing together with your family members is unlike anything in the world. I mean, it's truly, I think, what we're meant to be doing. Playing music in the home is just part of, a much better activity to share with each other than, say, watching movies, in my opinion. But I digress. So these, this parent had gotten really interested in what I was able to do with his child, because I've gotten really good. It doesn't even take that much, but maybe I'm good at it. Maybe it would be easy for everybody. I will explore that at some point when I lay this method out, but I'm basically able to duet with a child almost immediately and give them the instruction to just stay on the white notes and play whatever they want, but listen to me. And with some students, I have to really, really say, it doesn't matter what you play, right? And in other students, they take to it. Lately, these students have just been taking it to it like white on rice. Like, that's not really the proper statement, but taking it to like a fish in the ocean. Let's say that. Many, many students love this, especially I've been taking over some students lately that have, from another teacher, have been in lessons for 2 or 3 years and never been introduced to this, and they love it. It is so fun. It's showing them the joy of music, and this is an important part of lessons, that students that they're being explained or shown or demonstrated why they're working hard at music, right? Working hard has got to be part of the lessons, but if they don't know why they're doing it, then they won't do it. And this is probably another reason why when they see their parents playing music, it helps to answer that question of, why am I doing this? For all those years where they have to be very patient. But many of these students between the ages of 5 and 9 are willing to do this improvisation with me and love it. Now, not all of them. Some of them show me right then and there, even at that age, that they want to know, they want to play note per note. They want they want to be told what note to be played, right? That's just some people's personalities. And some of these personalities are because they're so strong in the details. They in many ways have a level of precision and logic in business. I mean, they have a talent. It's just that it's not there, and sometimes it's an indication of insecurity, right? Sometimes it can be an indication of them not being able to trust themselves. Of maybe they've been raised, or maybe they've absorb too much of an authoritative approach to life, and they are risk adverse, right? So it can show all that, but who knows? That's not the reason that, it's not about psychoanalyzing this child. It's just to explain that from 5 to 9, many children still have their creativity intact and they still enjoy making up songs. But it's still something to note. What level, how complete? Are they just little ditties and then they don't think about them again? Or has the student actually, this is one of the amazing things. I've had a student once, and I started teaching her when she was 5. She loved to sing, really. But the thing that was remarkable is that her songs would stay the same. She would sing a song for me one week and I'd be like, oh, that's a great song. Now, for most students, the very next week, they don't remember exactly how that song went, right? Even if they remember a few lyrics from it. She would literally sing it the same way every week. And this was more than one song. The songs that were coming through her were completely intact. The part I had a hard time with was explaining to her and her mom how rare this is and what technique that was. And unfortunately, now I taught her for many, many years, and for that type of student, she loved voice, but I was able to really pull piano in and get her to a place. Piano was never her favorite thing at all, but I was willing to convince her that for her songwriting, this was going to be necessary. And she did learn a fair amount of piano. But unfortunately, there came a point, and this happens to a lot of students in their pre-teens, that they get out of touch with that. Their identity changes, and suddenly they're not as comfortable making up songs. The songs kind of dry up, or they're just not as willing to do them in front of me. They don't have, if at this point I'm not on the same page with the parents, and we haven't been able to instill the idea, and this is where guidance is coming in, that this is a talent. This is a gift that you want to develop, even if you're not sure what you want to do with it, even if you don't want to share it with anybody. This could be just for you. But not every child has these songs coming to them. Some children are very happy to just play, other people's music. And in many cases, they might end up being a great musician. I know so many extraordinary musicians that have zero desire to ever make up a song. They are so happy to play other music, and their creativity flows that way. They're not any less creative. It's all about exploring what that child's particular expression is going to be, how their unique gifts are going to come together, and how that's going to look like for their life, right? And I love that. I love exploring this with children. I've been so fortunate to work with some kids from like very young to in their teens to following them in their 20s, finding out what they do with life. And it's been so fun. It's wonderful to see, because the emphasis shouldn't be like, oh, this child has this, so he needs to become this. That's that cog in that wheel mentality. Oh, he should follow this track then. And the hardest part of my teaching has been trying to get parents and students out of those tracks, right? Where they're thinking all one way or all another, or if they're good at this and they should do this, but they don't want to do this. So why would they do that? So that's what happened to that one particular child, I think, is that she got some weird feedback on some of her songs. And granted, some of the songs could have been construed as a little bit disturbing. But the thing was, this was a safe place for her to express that from an emotional intelligence place. Expressing things that are disturbing through song is the right place, and how you react to that is very, very important. And if a child faces a reaction like, what are you writing about that for? It can, that easily, songs are blocked. They never want to face that shame again. When they were their right brain was just open and pouring out, and in many ways could have been, a call to help. This is where music therapists and art therapists can come in and really, use creative arts to really be able to understand where a child is coming from, or an adult even, because many times we're unable to consciously understand things that go on, but through our creativity, we're able to understand more who we are. But we have to be willing to open up. We have to be willing to be vulnerable. And the people around us, this is advice to parents. My first advice for today, because I've just been kind of talking so far about my experiences. My first advice is that there needs to be a safe zone about music. And that doesn't mean that you praise your child when it doesn't sound very good. It doesn't have to be that. But there can't be shaming, and there has to be a recognition of when the child is being vulnerable, and just being careful, right? Being very careful to, when you give criticism, that it's constructive criticism, that it's done in the right way, and that you're giving heaps and heaps of encouragement. And it doesn't always have to be encouragement about the outcome. A child might be playing something and it doesn't sound very good at that point. But many times this is where parents can get it wrong, is it's like, oh, that sounds really bad. What are you talking about? Like, I don't think my child's very talented. Like, I don't think, what do you think? I mean, and they'll be saying things like this right in front of the child, right? And the problem with that is the parent doesn't understand the process. And what we want to encourage is the process. If the child is working hard of it, if the child has been focusing, then the analogy I always use is that it's like a plant with sunshine. You give it the sunshine. The sunshine is the encouragement. The sunshine is the acknowledgement. I see how hard you're working. I want to commend you for the focus that you're giving. I want to commend you with the determination that you have to finish that piece. I can tell that this is not easy for you to do, and you have stuck with it anyways. This is the type of encouragement. It's about the work, not the outcome. Now, when a child sounds beautiful, it's very natural, like, oh, wow, you sound beautiful, right? And this is great. But I find that it's a much more substantive type of encouragement when we're acknowledging the work, that we're recognizing that the effort that the child is putting in, and that we're not just focusing on the outcome. Because in many cases, to be honest with you, the child is not going to sound good. Okay. Realistically, it takes a very long time for a student to sound good at music. And that doesn't mean they're not talented, and it doesn't mean they'll never sound good. Right? That's number one. That's one of the hardest things that music teachers deal with, is parents' unrealistic expectations about what their child can accomplish in music and how long it takes. Patience, patience, patience. Okay? So much is about patience, and it's easier for these children to do it. I mean, just imagine how hard it is for adults, and how often friends and family discourage adults by hearing them. And rather than being able to figure out a way to encourage that person without, and this is the big thing I'll say, without lying, without just sending smoke up their butt, right? Because that's the other, many things in society today are going to one extreme or the other, and it's really about the balance. Because I also recognize that there is a tendency in the educational system today, and maybe a parenting trend, to be too encouraging. Like the child barely did any work, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. Oh, that sounds so good. And that's also not right, because now we're giving that child a false illusion. We're not loving the child by being grounded and honest with them. Right? So, you could give a compliment like, wow, you have really been working on that. It's not quite where we want it to be, but I can tell you are getting there. And I think you have the determination to do it. Do you think you do? Can you keep working on this? Because maybe we want it to be a little bit smoother, right? And I think that's one of the things I've learned from so many years in what I call in the trenches and music education, working with students hours and hours and hours out of my week, right? Some days, 7 days a week. In some cases, students from all over the world, all over cultural backgrounds, all over levels, so many different personalities, day in and day out, being in that room with them, trying to help motivate them to not only from a metaphor place, to learn this piece of music or learn these concepts that were in front of us, but always in the back of my mind as a metaphor to help them build the self-esteem that they can learn these things, right? That they have these character traits that are needed to succeed in this world and to feel good about themselves. So yes, that's what being in the trenches isn't like. And that's why I sometimes stand firm in my professionalism when it comes to students and in my opinion, because I have spent very, very many hours in that place. And many, many times I surprised myself with what I came to and what I learned. But what I did learn is a way to support a child, guide a child, encourage a child without going into being fake or inauthentic, because I think that does do a disservice to children. And it's also why I stand in my authority on some of these subjects, because even though I'm not a mother, my knowledge on children is different, because you're an expert on these very specific children, and you're also in a situation where being objective is going to be hard, because the love of a mother, and I'm speaking specifically to mothers, but I don't mean to exclude fathers out of this, but I just want to speak specifically to mothers, because this is I know more about women, to be honest with you. The love that a mother has for her child can be blinding at times. And it can make, it difficult to walk this very line of how to encourage a child, but also to give honest feedback, because honest feedback is loving. It doesn't have to come from a shaming, critical place. That's not what I'm talking about. And in many of those cases, that's why the education system is maybe yo-yoed back, because it doesn't want to do these shaming techniques. It doesn't want to make children feel less than, right? And we've all come from that. We've all experienced those type of tactics, old school tactics to motivate us, shaming us, criticizing us. And many of us came from parenting situations with the same thing, right? But there's also another extreme that's happening a lot in America. And that extreme is not being loving to your child by only being encouraging, by, that's like the fun, safe, positive soccer, like not really having a grounded approach to teaching that child in a way that's authentic. Because, if you shelter your child with too much love and don't give them honest feedback, if you hear your child play a piece of music and it doesn't sound good and they haven't been working on it, but you encourage them anyways, then they're not going to have a realistic understanding of what it takes to make it in the world, of what hard work means, of what true character ethics mean, right? It's just for show at that point. It's surface deep. That encouragement won't really instill a deep sense of self-esteem in that child because it's not based in authenticity. And the child knows it. Children know way more than adults what's real and what's not real. They have to sort of be taught not to know that. They have to be taken out of alignment. My theory is that children come into this world very aligned, highly sensitive, very in tune with their gifts. And in many cases, our education system does a disservice and pulls them out of this. One of the things I want to say that I've seen over and over again is that it might be that most students are ready at 7 to take lessons. I can't say if it's truly because, well, let me back up. This is something that I pointed out last week, but I'll repeat really fast, is that from my experience, every child is ready by 7. Before 7, it's a variable. Some are ready by 5. Some are not even close to being ready. Below 5, even some are ready, but even then, I still recommend group lessons because I think that children enjoy the group lessons more. But I've seen successful lessons given to 4-year-olds. The question that I don't know is by the time they're 20, 30, are they still playing, right? Whereas my goal has always been to instill a love of music that will last with them for a lifetime, so that that gift is with them for a lifetime, so that all the work they put in as a child, they get to profit from when they're older. Because the biggest shame to me is when I meet adults and they've been trained, some of them through Juilliard, up through college, and they don't touch their instrument at that point. But what's even more of a shame is that I see many, many students starting around the age of 7 on start to lose their creativity. As I mentioned, many students like to still make up songs at 7, 9, but once they hit that preteen stage and on, then it starts to become more rare that a student is still willing to make up a song, right? Now, is that because they're honing more in on their natural talents and some people are songwriters and some aren't? Or is it because their creativity is starting to, I don't know what the proper word would be, like crowded out by the logic? It's being ignored. It's being underdeveloped. It's being discouraged. Something's happening. And this is part of my biggest problem with the education system, is that it isn't helping students to, not only is it not helping, it really feels like it's going the other way when it comes to creativity. It feels like it's droning it out. And it's developing the logic. In some cases, many people would say it's not even developing that well anymore, as many schools have just fallen off the deep end. We don't do classics anymore. That's a debate for a different, it's not even really a debate, I wouldn't say. I think we all know, at least in America, the level of education has gone down tremendously. So what are they teaching our students? Because one thing I'm going to be certain about, they are not helping them develop their creativity. So that's when I want to bring in another quote that I have here. And let me see, because it looks like here it is. Okay, Carolyn Meiss, if you don't know her, excuse me, let me take a little sip of water before I read this. Okay, Carolyn Meiss is a medical intuitive. She was an editor, I think, and she really didn't want to be a medical intuitive. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like a psychic, but with medical things in particular. She studied the human body and she was able to, go in and really hone in on people's diseases. And I came across her many years ago because of her writings, which I always found very helpful. But it's been over a decade, really, since I've listened to her. So I don't know where she's at these days. And once again, anybody I'm quoting, any resources I'm bringing up here, it's only for the sake of discussion. And it's by no means saying that my entire thought system is lined up or my entire moral system is lined up with this person. So when I read this quote, think of that from that direction. But I do love this quote. So this is Carolyn Meiss's quote. "The journey of life is only about us becoming comfortable with the creative force of our soul." So let me read that again. "The journey of life is only about us becoming comfortable with the creative force of our soul, the creative force of what we are, of how creative every word we say is, every thought we have, the force of our power." This is why I'm so focused on helping students to never lose touch with their creative force, and why I'm so impassioned to help adults to reconnect with their creative force, because I believe it's central to who we are as human beings. And with the rise of AI, I find that only to be more so. If we're going to contribute to society with AI coming in the way it is, that is the one thing we can do over AI, our creative force. And so many of us have been talked out of it and have become cogs in a wheel, and we don't know how to get back to it. So music lessons, art lessons, crafts, sports even, so many activities that are considered extracurricular are actually essential for the development of a child, because we live in a different world, and I've seen it happen. There are many, many, many of these youngins coming in, even up to in their 20s, that have not had their creativity shut down. They are not blocked from it. They never were. Somehow they made it through, even with this education being the way it is, either by their parents or maybe because they did have a teacher in that system that fostered it, or maybe because of all the extra movements that have been happening in the educational system. Probably a lot of them were homeschooled. Many, many reasons I've seen these students never get shut down. Whereas the work I've had to do as an adult and the work of many of the parents that I'm probably speaking with, we've had to learn how to open ourselves back up to it. I have a wonderful, wonderful student right now who I taught many years ago before she had a child. And now that she's had a child, has just opened her up just from being around this child. Right? Just from being around children, they can reconnect us with our creativity. And that creative force is important. Somehow society has talked us out of that and made it like this is frou-frou, right? This is just, we've got to come, everything is five senses, everything's got to come from our logic, everything's got to be science. And the arts and creativity and imagination, and I would even tie it up with the spiritual, all these things that are maybe vibrating at a different vibration from this logic or this sort of denser 3D reality. The message I got was that it was frivolous. It was a waste of time. It wasn't important, but it is important. It's very, very, very important. One of the things that's very important is to a sense of well-being and to uncovering who you are in this life and the power that you have to create it, right? This gets into the spiritual sciences. This gets into the secret, which all of that is, excuse my language, but bastardized, sort of dumbed down versions of something that I do think is essentially true, that we are creative beings at our deep level, and somehow we are co-creating reality. I don't entirely understand it, but our imagination is key to that. Our thoughts are key to that. Our words are key to that. And so many of us are just not able, we have runaway minds. We have minds that are overly busy, filled with thoughts that probably aren't even ours, right? And we've lost that power. So music as a metaphor is reclaiming that. And by using an instrument or using the power of your voice, you are connecting it and grounding it in with the 3D. And this is one of the reasons why music lessons is just so important for students and for children. And why, while a student is taking, I recommend that the parent takes them as well, because it's great for the parents as well. And it is, what I say is, it's a decision that you just never regret. You just don't. Even students that have taken time in music lessons, some of them do have a sense of failure from it. Some of them do have a sense of, I wasn't good. But very few of them, I think, would ever be sad that they learned how to play an instrument, that they knew how to play an instrument, right? It's truly something that brings people joy, a sense of accomplishment. It helps them in their identity. There's a book that I had read a long time ago called Reviving Ophelia. And it was a lot about this idea that especially for girls in their like 10, 11, 12, that junior high age, having an instrument or having a sport or having some sort of activity, creative expression can really help them to make it through that time period with their self-image intact. Because I can speak personally, that's such a scary time period. And if you don't have a strong sense of who you are at that point, that is one of the places you can get so off track with yourself. I know personally how that can be. And then you can end up spending so much of your adult life trying to rediscover that person that you let go of during that time period. So these music lessons can help to anchor girls. And I'm speaking specifically about girls because I'm a woman, but I do think that it's true for boys as well. And I don't mean to neglect boys, because I think they have been neglected in many ways, and I think they need this attention. And in many cases with music lessons, you see over and over again that, in fact, up to a certain age, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, students do better with their same sex, right? So guys with guys and girls with girls. And this maybe goes to a mentorship, this goes to a comfortability, especially in that sort of time period there of 10, 11, 12, 13. It's a very tricky time for both boys and girls. And having a music teacher that can be a role model for them, having one of the same sex can help them to feel more comfortable, can help to supplement the parents during that time period. So I can't believe it. I've been talking for a long time and I really haven't even gotten to a lot of my notes on this. So I'm going to talk more about this. I really didn't get into the nuts and bolts advice that I would like to do. I'm basically just giving you everything, all of my, everything I have to offer on this subject. And I'm doing it sort of in an improvised way, even though I had planned out some things to say. I'm just sort of let the Spirit take over here and kind of just went with it. But I'm going to look at my notes really fast as we're closing out just this last 5 minutes or so. And see, it looks like I actually did hit a lot of my points. Music, art, sports, writing. The important part, I'm going to differentiate. The important part here is that as a parent, that you are seeking teachers that are looking to balance the discipline with the imagination and the creativity, right? And there are teachers out there. I'm one of them, and I have seen a fair number. Now, is it everybody? No, definitely not. And the things you want to stay away from is when it starts to become cookie cutter formula type of things. And that's what I think happens in school. Writing is taught in school, art is taught in school, but because it's so hard to deal with that number of students, and because of the way the educational system has started to just need to be quantified, it's become formulaic. And so you have formulas for writing, right? Or if you're doing art, you sort of have the art paint by numbers type of stuff. That's better than nothing. And I know it's fun for those children, but it's not the same as really developing a drawing skill. You know, learning to draw from scratch, or really understanding how music works and learning how to read music. It's because it's such a full body experience. I was talking to a student about this the other day. You know, it's the dexterity in your hands. It's the volume that you're playing. It's using your ears. It's in your brain, having to pay attention to the sound whilst you're paying attention to the notes on the page, whilst you're then trying on top of that to layer in expression, right? Expressing something, bringing in the emotional body, bringing in the idea of expressing beauty, not just playing these notes right. All of that starts to bring your full being online. And that's the type of experience that we want, right? We want to not just have our children fragmented into parts, and while they're at school, this part gets to function, but we have to shut down all this other stuff. It's like, no, letting the child operate with all of these senses having to function at the same time. It can be very difficult at first, but because it's a human skill and a human nature, when you lead the child very quickly, it's second nature and it's easy. It's also uniting the right and the left hemisphere when we're using the logic needed to play music, right? And the structure with the right side that is sensing patterns and expressing emotion or ideas. So it's uniting the brain in a way. So that's one of the things that's one of the biggest benefits to playing music, especially when they're young. It's wiring the brain to know how to use both hemispheres at the same time. When there's been so many studies that, the left brain is dominant, right? And that many, many people are sort of shutting down or not using that right brain creativity. So yeah, I guess I'll just stop with a big victory for me that happened in this last week is that two people have come to me and expressed that I helped them to pick up an instrument later in life. They were people who had played when they were young. They had played in churches. It was okay. It wasn't something that they identified as like, I want to be a pianist in life, right? But they played it and they were at a decent level. And back then there was more of that, right? Back then people had to have the children play at churches more. There was more opportunities where children had to become at least functional in music. And these women did that. But once they became in their 20s, they didn't touch it. And then lo and behold, they start to hit retirement age around 70 and they pick up their instrument again. And the most interesting part about it is that it takes somewhere between 2 to 6 months, but it comes back. I mean, just like they say, just like riding a bike, all of that work that they did is in there. It doesn't come back the minute they sit down and touch the piano, but it comes back with the repetition of daily practice for a certain amount of time. Bam, it's back. And they both are enjoying it so much. And it's been so wonderful because this is my mission in life, to not only continue to develop my talent as a musician just because it helps me to feel more of who I am. And it doesn't matter if I ever reach any sort of notoriety for it, any sort of career where I'm making a lot of money from it. That's not the goal. The goal is to play because it's part of who I am, and to inspire other people to do the same so that we can live more holistically as our whole identity, not fragmented, not parts of us, not allowing certain parts of us to be out in the world and pushing and suppressing other parts of us, but actually being healthy, whole people. And in that, pursuing music, pursuing your creativity. Maybe it's not music, okay? But your creativity, bringing your creativity online is important to that. That's the message for today. I will have to wrap it up here. But I will say that I'm going to speak more on this. I love talking about this, and I'm going to figure out a way to share this because so often I'm talking one-to-one to parents about this, but I'd like to get my information out. And once again, if it's not helpful for you, if it doesn't resonate with you, if you're coming from a different direction, no problem. I am not saying that this should be forced on anybody, but I'm sharing in a spirit of, if this helps you, please go forth with it, right? I want to share the time that I had in the trenches, the things that I learned in a professional way with people, because this is my passion. This is my professional passion. Always with the sense of saying, actually, my hat's off to parents, because at the end of the day, as a music teacher, I can say adios and go home and do my thing at home, play my piano, do my thing. It is so different for the parents. So I love being here to help you in whatever way I can never in a spirit of judgment, because I do not know what it's like to raise a child. I don't. But more to just say that we see you. We're so thankful for those parents that are out there doing everything they can for their children. And I just want to say, God bless you. And if possible, if at all possible, see about bringing in some music to you and your children's life. And I hope it helps.